Hello, and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. Last week, we continued our journey through Exodus chapter 19, and we began to consider the question of whether or not the Israelites were supposed to ascend Mount Sinai. Today, we're going to make it all the way through the rest of the chapter, and I'm going to give my 7 reasons why I think it was right for them not to ascend. Okay, so we'll begin by reading my translation of the rest of the chapter, starting with verse 14. So Moses went down from the mountain to the people. He sanctified the people, and they washed their garments. He said to the people, "Be ready for the 3rd day. Do not approach a woman sexually." So on the 3rd day, when it was morning, there was thunder and lightning and a heavy mass of clouds upon the mountain, and the sound of a shofar was very loud. All the people who were in the camp trembled. Moses brought the people out from the camp to meet the deity, and they took their stand at the base of the mountain. Now the whole surface of Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because Yahweh had come down upon it as flames. Its smoke arose like the smoke of the kiln. The whole mountain trembled greatly. While the sound of the shofar went on getting much louder, Moses spoke and the deity answered with a voice. So Yahweh came down upon Mount Sinai to the head of the mountain, and Yahweh summoned Moses to the head of the mountain, and Moses ascended. Yahweh said to Moses, "Go down. Warn the people lest they throw down the barrier to see Yahweh, and many of them fall. Even the priests, those who draw near to Yahweh, must sanctify themselves, lest Yahweh break through against them." Moses said to Yahweh, "The people are unable to ascend Mount Sinai because you yourself warned us, saying, 'Set boundaries around the mountain and consecrate it.'" But Yahweh said to him, "Go, descend, come back, you and Aaron with you, but the priests and the people must not break down the barrier to ascend to Yahweh, lest he break through against them." So Moses went down to the people, and he spoke to them. Okay, so we have the sound of a shofar here, which is a different way of expressing what the trumpet is than we saw in last week's passage, where it was called a ram's horn. Now, a shofar is made from a ram's horn, so that doesn't mean these are different things. It's just interesting that we have a different term being used to describe the trumpet, and that introduces even more doubt or ambiguity about, wait, are we supposed to go up now because the horn is blowing or not? Is this a different thing than what God said? So there's this sense of uncertainty about it. Normally, a shofar is used either for a military signal or to mark religious festivals. Here, clearly the context is religious, but the shofar here calls Moses alone to ascend the mountain, which seems to clarify, okay, this is not for everybody else. Notice that the physical manifestation of the divine presence comes as a stormy volcano, and the mountain itself cannot tolerate the presence of God without trembling. So the mountain trembles and the people tremble. They have a physiological response to being this close to the presence of God. And this is an appropriate response for us if we are in the presence of God. What came to my mind as I was processing this is a scene from the Chronicles of Narnia, from the book The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, when the children from Earth who've just entered into Narnia are first finding out about Aslan, the great lion who rules Narnia. And I think this captures beautifully what we see happening at the mountain. Susan asks, "Is he quite safe? I shall feel rather nervous about meeting a lion." "That you will, dearie, and no mistake," said Mrs. Beaver. "If there's anyone who can appear before Aslan without their knees knocking, they're either braver than most or just silly." "Then he isn't safe?" said Lucy. "Safe," said Mr. Beaver. "Don't you hear what Mrs. Beaver tells you? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. He's the king, I tell you." So we have that kind of encounter here with Yahweh at Mount Sinai, where we discover he's good, and we'll see his goodness on display, but he's not safe. And to just waltz into his presence without proper preparation or without an invitation is actually dangerous. And the proper response is for our knees to be knocking. And that's the kind of response that we see from the Israelites. So as a mediator, Moses led them to meet with God, and they took their stand at the base of the mountain. So they came to meet with God, but they didn't approach God by ascending the mountain. Taking their stand is the same language we saw from Miriam in chapter 2, where she took her stand by the water, by the reeds where her brother was hiding. And in chapter 14, when the Israelites took their stand by the edge of the sea of reeds to watch God deliver them. Here again, they're going to see God's redemptive work. We're told that the smoke of the mountain was like the smoke of a kiln, and it's possible that this is an intentional echo. It's supposed to remind us of the kilns in Egypt. We read about them in chapter 9, verses 8 through 10, where Moses takes ash from a kiln and throws it up into the air, and it becomes festering boils on the skin of the Egyptians. It's possible, though we can't be certain, that these kilns would have been part of the brick-making process. Most mud bricks were not kiln-dried, they were just sun-dried. But some projects, especially important projects, would have had an outer layer of kiln-fired bricks. And so perhaps the reference to a kiln here is to remind them of the world they've come out of, and that Yahweh has set them free from that slavery. Verses 21 and 22 are fascinating, because Moses finally gets up the mountain, and the first order of business that God tells him is to clarify that the people are in fact not supposed to ascend the mountain. And that's the ambiguity of our passage from last week. Verse 13 had said not to ascend, and then when the ram's horn sounds, they're to ascend. And we were wondering, who's they, and what does this mean? Is this a test or a genuine invitation? But God says here in 21 and 22, they are not supposed to ascend. There's a mention of priests. We don't know any priests yet. We haven't been told of a particular priesthood. So it's possible that this is anticipating in the future when there are priests. Even they can't just come up the mountain or come into my presence whenever they feel like it. They have to wait for the proper time, and they have to be in the proper state to do that. Leviticus chapter 10, verse 2 tells us the story of Nadab and Abihu, who are sons of Aaron and priests, and they just waltz into God's presence doing things their own way, and they are immediately put to death. Moses descends the mountain to tell the people not to ascend, so there's lots of up and down the mountain, and that puts him with the people for the start of chapter 20, which is where God declares the 10 Commandments, or the Decalogue, to the people. So this up and down the mountain sets us up for God's direct speech of the 10 Commandments to the people. Moses' ascent and descent of the mountain repeatedly sometimes doesn't seem to have a clear purpose. Like, well, now why is he going up? Well, now why is he coming down? And I want to point out what I think is a really ingenious solution to this conundrum. Many scholars through history have suggested that what we're looking at here, and the reason it's so messy with all these ups and downs, is that we have a composite text that's a bunch of different texts that have been inexpertly woven together. They've been sort of jumbled, and so we get lots of ups and downs because nobody wanted to delete anything from these separate texts. However, there's another possibility that I think is more plausible. Timothy Hogue has a book about the 10 Commandments that came out earlier this year, and he points to the ancient Near Eastern monumental tradition as the key to understanding this passage. He says that access to I am monuments, which were a way that royalty declared their identity and laid claim to a particular territory, that access to these I am monuments installed by ancient kings was carefully guarded, with greater proximity granted to certain people. He also notes that they don't get to approach these monuments directly. So I'm going to quote from his book here. He says, a direct approach to such a monument would be highly unusual. Rather, these artifacts were embedded in tiered theaters with different levels of participants, filed into tiers of increasing intimacy with the artifacts and thereby the agent, that is the one whose declaration is on the monument. Those that could approach the monument did so by means of many pauses, retreats, 180-degree turns, and precarious climbs. So there was a sense in which you can't just walk into the presence of a deity or of royalty, your access to the powerful was carefully guarded and required lots of negotiation and navigation. So it's very possible that what we're experiencing in Exodus 19 to 24, with all the trips up and down the mountain and all the different kind of fits and starts, that this is actually trying to convey a sense of the majesty of God and the need for utmost care in approaching his presence. Leon Cass also suggests that the reader's perplexing experience trying to make sense of these introductory moments mimics the awesome, bewildering experience of the people on the ground. They are surely disoriented, as are we. So perhaps the narrator is intentionally trying to help us to see this is a big deal. You can't just walk right in. It's going to take us some time before we're in the proper mode of being able to approach God's presence. Notice that the mountain has 3 tiers of access, so the people are at the base. Later in chapter 24, we're going to see the elders going up partway to have a covenant meal with God, and only Moses goes all the way to the top of the mountain. And this 3-tiered access also mimics the 3-tiered access of the temple or tabernacle, where the people can come in the courtyard, only the priests can go in the holy place, and only the high priest once a year can go into the most holy place. It seems like we're already getting a sense of the sacredness of God's presence and that limited access that results. So I want to close with a list of 7 reasons why I think it's most likely that this text is supposed to convey Israel did the right thing by not ascending the mountain. So first of all, Yahweh indicated in chapter 19, verse 9, that the purpose of the theophany was to secure Moses as a mediator. Number 2, Yahweh warned that anyone who touched or climbed the mountain would face the death penalty. If we take that seriously, seems like they're not supposed to go up. Number 3, Yahweh summoned Moses alone to climb the mountain, warning the people not to break through the barrier, and later inviting only Aaron to join him and reiterating the prohibition for everyone else. Number 4, Moses indicated that he understood Yahweh's warning as a prohibition for the people to ascend, that it wasn't even necessary to say it a second time, because they all understood they were not supposed to go up. That's in verse 23. Number 5, between the Decalogue and the Covenant Scroll, so we're talking about chapter 20, verses 18 to 21, we have a request by the people for Moses to mediate, which fulfills Yahweh's stated purpose for Moses in relation to the people in chapter 19, verse 9. So Moses' reassurance to the people at that juncture suggests that they passed the test, that their fear was appropriate, their hesitation was appropriate. Number 6, Yahweh summoned Moses and a handful of leaders in chapter 24 to approach the divine presence partway up the mountain, but only Moses could ascend to the cloud on top of the mountain. So even that later access of the leaders was limited. And number 7, although Deuteronomy does not shy away from telling us the failures and foibles of the people, the retelling of Exodus 20 verses 18 to 21, their request for Moses to mediate, that the retelling of that in Deuteronomy affirms that Israel's response to the theophany was good. So for these reasons, I'm going out on a limb and disagreeing with Tim Mackey on whether or not the people should have ascended the mountain. Now, I want to hasten to say that the book of Hebrews makes clear in the New Testament that as followers of Jesus, we have full access to the presence of God, that we're in an even more weighty situation of being able to approach the divine presence. And so we need to be that much more careful about our own reverence for God and our own holiness. So yes, Jesus has removed the barrier so that we can enter God's presence, but all the more reason for us to take that very seriously and with utmost reverence. I hope this has been helpful. Next week, we will dive into the 10 Commandments.